We are resuming meeting number 127, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance, and pursuant to the Standing Order 108, bracket 2, and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 21st, 2023, the committee is meeting to discuss the policy decisions and market forces that have led to increases in the cost of buying or renting a home in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the Standing Order 15.1. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the members. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to the microphone. We therefore ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of the interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged in, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. Reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. And I do want to, before I introduce the witnesses, I want to thank the witnesses. Thank you for accommodating your time today, because we did have a vote that ate into some of the time here of our meeting. So I understand you'll be able to be with us till we transition to the second panel, which would be about 12:20 or so, 12:25. Okay, well, thank you for that. And with us today, we have from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and its Executive Director of Policy and Public Affairs, Matthew Belanger. Welcome. And from the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, we have Commissioner Judith Robertson. Welcome, Commissioner. And the Deputy Commissioner, Supervision and Enforcement, Frank LaFranco. Welcome. And at this time, you'll have an opportunity for opening statements, and then the members will have their opportunity to ask you questions. So you may begin.
Start.
Is it Ms. Robertson first? Yeah, okay. Yes, Commissioner.
Okay. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, pour cette présentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the committee for inviting me. I am accompanied by Frank LaFranco, Deputy Commissioner, Supervision and Enforcement of the FCAC. For those who don't know our mandate well, the FCAC is an independent federal agency that was established in 2001 to protect the rights and interests of consumers of financial products and services.
Collaboration with our federal partners, including the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, the Canada Deposit Insurance Corporation, Bank of Canada, and the Department of Finance. We coordinate our activities on matters relating to financial stability, systemic vulnerabilities, and the supervision of federally regulated financial institutions. FCAC carries out our important mandate in two principal ways. First, as a regulator, we supervise the compliance of federally regulated financial entities, primarily banks, with consumer protection measures that are set out in legislation, public commitments, and codes of conduct. Second, FCAC is mandated to strengthen the financial literacy of Canadians, and we do this in various ways, including educating Canadians about their rights and responsibilities when dealing with financial institutions. And we also conduct research and monitor trends on emerging issues that affect financial consumers. We welcome this opportunity to engage with the committee on our work relative to the important topic of housing finance. The impact of housing costs on household finances and the vulnerability of mortgage holders in today's environment are issues we're keenly aware of and that relate to both sides of our mandate. Unfortunately, when we were invited to appear last fall, we misunderstood that your focus was on housing pricing and availability. We now understand that the scope of your study encompasses areas that converge with our mandate, so we're particularly happy that you invited us back. Before responding to questions, I'd just like to highlight a couple of areas of our work related to housing finances. On the regulatory side, the consumer protection measures we oversee apply to a wide range of products and services, including residential mortgages that are offered by banks. These measures were strengthened in 2022 when the Financial Consumer Protection Framework came into force. The new framework reflects a focus on outcomes, and it puts more onus on the industry to responsibly manage how and what they sell to consumers and how they respond when disputes occur. One example of the framework in action is the Guideline on Existing Consumer Mortgage Loans in Exceptional Circumstances that FCAC issued last July. We call it the Mortgage Guideline for short. Guidelines are a supervision tool that provide industry with clarity regarding FCAC's expectations for how they comply or should comply with their regulatory obligations. Specifically, this guideline sets out our expectations that in response to the current exceptional economic circumstances, financial institutions will adopt fair and consistent approaches when they offer relief measures to consumers who are at risk of defaulting on the mortgage on their principal residence. Importantly, the guideline is based on best practices in financial consumer protection and centered around the principles of fairness, appropriateness, and accessibility, which are also reflected in the new framework. FCC's guideline was informed by our internal research, and this demonstrates how the two sides of our mandate work together. Since 2020, we've been conducting a monthly survey to track the financial well-being of Canadians. Excuse me. There's abundance of great information in this data, and we release it publicly, and we share the data sets with other researchers. We have added questions relating to housing finance in response to the challenges of the current environment. And a key finding that drew our strong attention at the end of last year was that homeowners with a mortgage have been increasingly at risk of experiencing financial hardships, demonstrated by having to borrow for daily expenses or draw on savings. So it was in response to these findings that FCC acted and issued its mortgage guideline. In addition, we continue to increase our educational efforts. We've developed new information relating to the mortgage relief measures and how consumers can make informed decisions. The theme of last November's Financial Literacy Month was focused on managing debt. And FCAC recently launched a national multimedia advertising campaign to promote FCAC's tools and resources related to renting or buying a home and choosing, renewing, and paying for a mortgage. That concludes my opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Robertson. And now we'll hear from Monsieur Belanger, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning.
De committee. Mon nom est Mathieu Bélanger.
My name is Mathieu Bélanger. I am an urban planner and the executive director of policy and public affairs for the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. The FCM represents the governments closest to people and 2,100 municipalities. That is 90% of Canada's population. I'm pleased to speak today on issues involving residential affordability, which is crucial to Canadians across the country. Municipalities are dealing with issues related to the housing crisis, that is providing emergency housing to asylum seekers, refugees, finding innovative solutions to chronic homelessness and other issues. Every day, municipalities are taking action to support and accelerate the creation of new housing. Municipalities are also doing what they can to ensure social and community housing, and it is necessary that we recognize the need for financial support.
0.5 million new housing units are needed above the current trend if we are going to restore housing affordability by 2030. Considering the current unprecedented population growth our country experiences, we must enable our municipalities to fully play their crucial role in reaching that target. Population growth is positive and transformative for Canada, and many of our communities are seeing accelerated housing construction. Metropolitan areas across the country, such as Halifax, Moncton, Kingston, Calgary, and Victoria, had their highest numbers of new housing start in 2023. All over Canada, cities and municipalities, urban and rural, are accelerating permitting, simplifying zoning rules, and streamlining approvals to make sure units can get built faster. And just for a few examples, as you probably know, Toronto now permits multiplexes citywide, and since last year, new rules allow for up to 4 units on a single lot. In Edmonton, the city passed a density-boosting zoning bylaw allowing 3-story apartment and row housing citywide. In Kelowna's, with their laneway projects, this has resulted in many new units through innovative infill development. Also, many municipalities have recently accessed new funding through the Housing Accelerator Fund. This program makes a real difference as it facilitates the modernization of planning and approval tools and helps to fund action to unlock housing development. It demonstrates the innovative, the responsive nature of Canadian municipalities. However, and I want to be very clear on this, in Canada, we don't just need new housing units. We also need complete neighborhoods with good public services. We need buses running regularly and on time. We need communities where nobody is left behind without a roof at nighttime. So new housing units are needed to improve affordability, but we also need the infrastructure that go with them. These infrastructure are mainly owned and maintained by municipalities. Here we're talking about the roads and the subway you're using to commute, the parks you go for a walk, the facility that your trash is where your trash is recycled, or the shelters for homeless people. Growing the housing supply to restore affordability without thinking about the infrastructure that sustain it won't lead us to success. Just in Brampton, Ontario, it was recently estimated that the infrastructure investment required to support the planned housing growth up to 2031 will come to approximately $2 billion, which is significant. This example shows how communities are faced with very substantial funding shortfalls when it's time to grow the housing supply. We need new infrastructure funding to grow the housing supply in the short term to address water and wastewater infrastructure, as well as adaptation to climate change, and this is the basic minimum. In the long term, to ensure that Canada's growth is successful, we need a new, more equitable way to fund local governments. It is high time to equip municipalities with revenue tools that are linked with national population and economic growth. Local government need to be able to count on diverse, adequate, and predictable sources of revenue. Accordingly, FCM is calling on the federal government to commit in Budget 24 to convene provinces, territories, and municipalities to negotiate a new municipal growth framework. This will position Canada to enable long-term growth and prosperity and better respond to the need of a rapidly growing population. It will help to provide the infrastructure that the new housing needs, will contribute to restore affordability while moving towards ending homelessness. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Monsieur Belanger, for your opening remarks. And now we're going to move to the members' questions in the first round, and we won't get much more than the first round. But in this round, each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask you questions. We are starting with MP Chambers for the first 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Mr. Robertson. Pleasure to have you here. Appreciate that you eventually accepted the invitation, so thank you for supporting our study. Just wanted to talk a bit about your mortgage guideline, which came out, I think, in June or July of last year. And then in September, OSFI put out a very direct note saying B20 guidelines had to be enforced. it seems to me that there's a little bit of daylight between the recommendations that FCAC is making or expectations that FCAC has on organizations than what OSFI is putting on organizations. Is that a fair interpretation?
So no, there is no contradiction or daylight, and I believe we've sent a letter to that effect where we tried to explain that. The purposes and the targets are different. Our mortgage guideline is intended to address temporary measures to allow those consumers who are at risk of default to make some adjustments or examine their options in order to either return to compliance or not.
Right. But you don't define temporary, correct?
We don't specifically define temporary, but it is quite clear in the guideline, the expectation. The OSFI guideline, which they can explain better than I can, of course, is around new contracts or permanent changes.
Okay. Are you following or receiving data back from the institutions that you regulate about how they're dealing with requests for relief?
Yes, so one of the aspects of the guideline is there's a reporting requirement.
Is it possible that you share some of that reporting with this committee?
Yes, so it's still early days. Frank has some high-level
Not interested
information.
in, to be fair, I don't have a lot of time here. I'm not interested in getting into it right now, but I'm interested in the output.
Yeah,
So when you're presenting it to the government,
yeah.
when it's ready, we would appreciate it being tabled with this
Yeah,
committee. if that's-
absolutely. We
okay.
will also be publishing it publicly.
Okay,
Probably not till next summer, though, publicly.
Thank you very much. Who is paying for the relief that's being provided to consumers?
If the relief would be in the form of banks foregoing something they might otherwise get, either in a fee or an interest payment or something like that. So it would be the banks.
I submit that it's not the banks, that the other consumers are paying for the relief. And I think I would recommend that we examine what's been happening at banks for other products and other consumers. For example, checking accounts that still provide 0% in some cases or 0.5% in interest. NSF charges that have gone up, overdraft charges that have gone up. I submit the banks are not doing this out of the goodness of their heart, that other customers are subsidizing this relief. In fact, because OSFI is not allowing uninsured mortgage holders to shop a mortgage at a renewal, that's also where some of this margin is being made up. Now, OSFI doesn't allow uninsured mortgages to shop at renewal, but as part of the mortgage charter, if you're insured, you're allowed to shop at renewal and not have to do the stress test. I don't understand how that is a definite contradiction, and I don't know if you have any comments on that contradiction. OSFI says if you're uninsured, you have to do the stress test at renewal. FCAC and the government says if you're insured, you don't have to do. You can shop and not do the stress test. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, so there's quite a lot in there. So I accept your concern around pricing and whether pricing in one area is cross-subsidizing another area. I think that's why pricing is a challenging issue. There are provisions to protect consumers from unfair treatment, and we put specifically in the mortgage guideline a provision that addresses that fact, that banks are prohibited from taking advantage.
Okay. But it still leaves a fair bit of daylight. If I have an insured mortgage, which by definition is more likely to default than an uninsured mortgage because the uninsured mortgage is greater than 20% down. Why is it that the government is allowing the insured mortgage holder to shop without doing the stress test, but OSFI is forcing a stress test to be done for the uninsured? Like, how is that kind of a fair application of relief, if you will?
Yeah, so the relief measures do speak to whether it is insured or uninsured. So there's no difference in the guideline between the relief measures that are expected and the behavior expected towards insured or uninsured.
Thank you very much. That someone should tell OSFI that they should allow the uninsured the same kind of flexibility.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, MP Chambers. And now to MP Thompson, please.
Thank you. Thank you to the witnesses. And if I could start with you, Mrs. Robertson. When banks reach out to borrowers 4 to 6 months before their mortgage is up, and it's part of the mortgage chart of the Feds, borrowers are obviously given the opportunity to engage with the lender and hopefully find a solution that works for both parties. For clarity, are banks independently deciding who is at risk and who isn't?
Yes, that is part of their obligation. So banks are under the guideline. The expectation is banks must proactively first identify who customers at risk are, then proactively reach out and discuss options with them. So trying to essentially get ahead of problems, and the earlier anticipated problems are tackled, the more options there would be for remedy.
Thank you. And I just want to touch on the previous conversation around mortgage stress tests. And obviously they were introduced when mortgage rates were lower. Would you argue that without the stress test during high interest rate environment like the one we're currently find ourselves in, that the situation for mortgage owners would have been far worse?
So the stress test is a prudential tool, so not my area of expertise. It is a macro-prudential tool principally, but of course it does have a micro-prudential impact, which is there are likely some borrowers who were saved from overextending.
Thank you. Could you speak to the bank's compliance with FCAC's mortgage guidelines, and has the compliance been high?
Yes, I'd be happy to turn to Frank, actually, who has some more detail on the reporting, preliminary reporting we've received to date.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for the question. Pleasure to be with you here today. So the guideline does have a requirement for reporting. So we are to receive periodic reports from the financial institution subject to the guideline. We recently received our first set of complete data, and that data is at a fairly high level, and more detailed data will be submitted to us in the coming months, and that's the data we hope to examine and report out on. But at a very high level, we're quite satisfied currently with industry's response. The reporting shows that institutions have put in place procedures to deal with the guideline. There is evidence showing that there has been the identification of mortgage accounts at risk, that they have been proactively contacted to discuss options early enough to make informed decisions. We also know that some relief measures have been already put in place with respect to some of those mortgage accounts. At a very high level, and again, these are estimates, the reporting shows that there's about 5 million mortgage accounts in relation to our guideline, i.e. residential principal residents. Of those, less than 1% have been identified at risk, and of that 1%, approximately 10% have been benefiting from relief measures. So that's about 35,000 accounts deemed at risk, for which about 3,500 to 4,000 accounts have benefiting from relief measures. Again, those are estimates. I feel confident enough to share them with you, but we're really looking forward to the detailed data that will arrive in the coming months, with the view to putting out something publicly in the summer. And as was noted earlier, we'd be happy to return to the committee and share that with all of you.
Thank you. Could you speak to the enforceability of the guidelines?
Absolutely. To understand the enforceability in relation to our guidelines, it would help if I could just take a moment and step back and situate it within the supervision framework in which the FCAC has established and works within. So quite simply, the supervision framework is organized around 3 pillars of activity. One is promotion, one is monitoring, and the third is enforcement. Specific to the guideline is a tool to promote compliance by way of establishing clear expectations from a regulatory perspective. I'll stick with the example of the guideline. As it relates to monitoring, we actively engage on a regular basis to identify emerging issues with respect to implementation, to either get out ahead of them or to ensure corrective actions are being planned and taken with respect to those issues. In the case of the guideline, there's the added requirement for reporting. So obviously the reporting allows us to monitor. With respect to enforcement, we have a bit of a graduated model, which is to say as issues surface and we assess them against risk, we increase the intensity of our oversight and supervision. The guideline does include some important provisions, those related to the offering of appropriate products and services. There's provisions in relation to disclosure and how that's provided so that it's clear and not misleading. There's also provisions with respect to express consent, receiving written confirmation of whatever you've agreed to. So when these provisions are found to be in non-compliance, we undertake investigations. And when those investigations confirm the non-compliance, we will issue an enforcement action, of which we have more than one type, depending on the nature of the non-compliance.
MP Thompson, and now we'll go to MP Samari, please.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to invite all of the witnesses, rather I want to thank them all. Your presence is appreciated. And my first question is for Ms. Robertson concerning what we call negative amortization. Do you know how many consumers are currently in a negative amortization situation? That is where the interest that has not been paid is added to the principal. Thank you for that question. If I
of the number of mortgage holders who are currently in negative negative amortization. It's a serious issue. We have actually great concerns about that. We do have some numbers. Again, also on a preliminary basis. Frank, do you want to just speak to the amount?
Absolutely. Thank you again for the question. So negative amortization is specific to a mortgage type, variable rate mortgages with a fixed payment. And negative amortization will kick in when a particular interest rate triggers a situation in which your payment no longer covers your principal. And if interest rates continue to change, that payment will not even cover all of the interest, thereby causing the accrued interest to be charged interest. Our guideline specifically identifies that as a potential relief measure. I should just open a parenthesis here and note that FCAC does not prescribe relief measures to financial institutions, but the guideline does identify some that may be relevant. And one of those is to not charge interest on interest. So this is a serious issue. It's something we're monitoring closely. Institutions do have the obligation to ensure products that are offered are appropriate for the circumstances that consumers find themselves in. With respect to the data, again, it's very high level, and negative amortization is happening in the range of about 150,000 to 200,000 mortgage accounts. Again, the sum total is 5.2 million. So relatively speaking, things seem to be in hand, but the early engagement by way of financial institutions to speak about options available to mortgage holders, and that's accompanied with an expectation that institutions provide sound advice, refer customers to other reputable sources of advice to allow consumers the time to make an informed decision on how to handle that. And the guideline does have options, which I'm happy to explain further. But in principle, I think that gives you a sense of scale relative to the issue and the sense of risk relative to the product.
Ah ben, merci pour.
Thank you for that answer, which was quite complete. This is a very worrisome issue. If you can provide details about the options that you mentioned for financial institutions to provide, if you can do that, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, happy to do so. So one option spelled out in the guideline is to allow for a lump sum payment to deal with the situation of negative amortization and to waive any fees or costs associated with those lump sum payments. Those are typically called prepayment penalties or payment penalties. And more importantly, when dealing with amortization and the possibility of extending it on a temporary basis, there is an expectation that, one, that be for the shortest period of time, two, that it be accompanied by a plan to return the consumer to the original amortization period, and at that time be reasonable in nature. And it's also accompanied by the requirement for the consumer to have details around the long-term implications around those kinds of decisions. The long-term financial well-being of consumers is the primary consideration, and lengthy amortizations, by definition, are not in the best interest of consumers. So the guideline, we're hoping, serves institutions and customers well to enable informed decisions to deal with the issue.
Merci encore.
Thank you again for that answer, which was quite complete. We will continue to monitor this issue because it is certainly a concern when we find that variable interest consumers, mortgage holders, are in the situation. Another question for the FCAC. You have the June 2023 financial well-being study. Are you expecting more difficulties in meeting payments for mortgage holders in the 6 months ahead of us?
Very much. So we certainly do anticipate that, as everyone does, by that I mean our colleagues in the federal oversight system, that in the coming months and over the next 2 years, as consumers hit renewal rates or hit trigger points, that there will be increased recognition and realization of challenges, and that could very well result in higher levels of default or missed payments. I think that that's a reasonable anticipation, as so many mortgages were put in place at much lower rates. There's going to be an impact as those get renewed or refinanced.
Okay, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci.
Mon temps est terminé.
My time is up.
And Commissioner Robertson, and now we're going to MP Blakey, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. So also to the agency, thank you very much for being here. I guess I'm curious to know what circumstances you think have to obtain in order for people who are in a negative amortization situation to get back to their regular amortization. So like short of winning the lottery or having an inheritance that allows them to exercise a lump sum option, is it really just hoping that interest rates come down fast enough that by the time they renew, they can get back on a regular amortization? And what does it mean for people who have already accrued a negative amortization to try and get back on a 25-year track?
It's a very serious issue. Thank you very much for that. It is a concern, and it is a concern about the product. So we share the superintendent's concern about the variable rate fixed payment because it's a complex product and has risks that are being realized and may not have been fully appreciated. What we do see happening for those mortgages where possible, as Frank mentioned, lump sums apparently have happened and allow a return. That is not everyone, of course. We also have seen switching to a fixed rate mortgage, with some other debt consolidation that allows a more reasonable. So it's very difficult to generalize, and that's one of the reasons that we have very emphasized the need for tailored relief measures, because each individual circumstance and the possibilities are different, but everybody's situation will be enhanced by at least addressing and understanding the issues earlier where they have options, and that could be up to and including the consumer-led sale of the residence. Yeah.
Are you concerned that there's an issue of fairness for folks that were on fixed payments who had to renew in a high interest environment and really didn't have any option at all? Whereas had they chose a fixed payment variable interest, negative amortization would have been an option for them, presumably, because it's something that banks seem to be doing quite a bit. Are you concerned about what this means for folks as they look at a difficult economic situation and maybe regret not having chosen a fixed payment variable interest option in order to be able to access another relief tool that folks on fixed terms weren't able to do?
So I'm not sure I understand exactly the question you're saying. There is no difference in the guidance about tailored relief measures and types of relief measures depending on what type of mortgage you have. So as far as fairness about how banks should treat any consumer, regardless of the type of mortgage they have, if they are at risk of default. So if that was what you were asking.
My question is, negative amortization is not coming up in the context of folks that were on fixed interest, fixed payment mortgage terms, right? So they have to renew, and then they either can renew or they can't renew.
Right.
And there may be some other relief options. Those would also be relief options available to folks who are on a variable interest fixed payment mortgage. In addition to that, people in that category have been able to access negative amortization as a temporary relief tool. Do you think that there's any issue of fairness that arises there by having negative amortization be a temporary relief tool for some mortgage holders and not for others?
So no, I don't, because I think it's just a different mechanism, right? So if you're on a fixed rate mortgage and you skip a payment, right, you add the interest to it is akin to negative amortization, just a different mechanism. So no, I don't think that there's a unfairness there.
Okay, and so I think I'm satisfied on that question. I want to ask our witness from the FCM on the question of kind of surrounding infrastructure that's required in order to be able to build more homes, and particularly to increase density, I think, in urban downtowns. Could you point to a federal program under the National Housing Strategy that does a good job of having allowances for that kind of peripheral, by which I don't mean non-essential, but peripheral infrastructure required to increase housing density?
Thank you for the question. I would say that the ICIP, the Canada Infrastructure Program, was quite significant and helpful for municipalities to put in place infrastructure to be able to sustain growth. Also, the current Housing Accelerator Fund makes infrastructure investment eligible, and this is also something positive. But ICIP, all the project had to be prioritized at March 31st, 2023. All these projects will be on the ground between now and I think 2026 or 2027, and there's certainly, we can see a gap coming in terms of infrastructure funding to make sure that municipalities are able and ready to welcome growth and make this national project that we are right now something that is positive. It's essential in our perspective to understand that This country needs more units, and more units would have a direct impact on affordability. But it's also required to put in place the infrastructure that will sustain these units, the pipes that are required in the ground, the quality of life equipment such as park and transit that are needed, and more funding is needed on this side. Because just in terms of the current state of the infrastructure, just the rehabilitation that is required is quite important. You mentioned the specific context of densification, which is quite interesting because very often we're under the impression that development charge can basically cover the cost for additional units or additional infrastructure required in the ground. It could be the case in terms of greenfield development, but very often in the case of urban intensification, when you densify a neighborhood, there's need also to basically to add capacity and add capacity not just on the pipe in front of the house, but to expand, for example, the water treatment plant at the end of the line. So all of this, it demonstrates that basically the needs are very important. FCM did a research a couple of months ago about the cost per unit of infrastructure to sustain any new housing built in Canada. And we arrived to a number of $107,000, which is quite significant. And if you multiply it to the scale of the 3.5 million homes needed as defined by CMHE, you see the amplitude of this national project we have in front of us.
Blakey also, and so members, we don't have time for a full round. We have very little time, but we have enough time for about 2 minutes for each party to ask a question or two, and we're starting with MP Morantz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To FCAC, Ms. Robertson and Mr. LaFranco, last year there was a news story based on an access to information request that between 2019 and 2023, there were 27,323 complaints filed with your offices and that none of them were responded to. I want to give you an opportunity to address that. And I guess my basic question is, why allow people to make complaints to your agency in the first place if your agency doesn't respond to them?
For that question. I'm really happy to address it. I did read that news story, and I actually found the news story was accurate, but the headline was not. We do receive complaints. Consumers, we have a center where consumers can make complaints, but we are not a complaint resolving entity. But we do have a system for complaints which has recently been significantly improved. So our role in complaints against banks is to supervise the system, right? So banks have an obligation to have effective complaint handling. It's been significantly upgraded as a result of the framework. And then if consumers are unsatisfied, they have the right to go to an external complaint body, which we also supervise, and we're moving to a single one. So that's the complaint resolution system. We receive complaints out of information in case there is some compliance issue that we should be aware of, and they do get reviewed by supervision in case we need to take action as a regulator, and it's also good information generally as to what's going on in the marketplace.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Morantz. I know it went quick. MP Weiler, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also to the witnesses for being here today. First question I'd like to ask to FCM, and I was hoping you could share with this committee if you see it as possible for municipalities to do their part to solve the housing crisis if infrastructure funding is in fact withheld until after housing targets are met.
I would say that on a daily basis, municipalities do their part to try to solve this housing crisis. I mentioned earlier the current Housing Accelerator Fund that basically help to address some planning and approvals and permitting issues within municipalities, which is something very great. But municipalities started also before this program to streamline approval and to make sure that basically units can get built. And the numbers we're seeing right now in some jurisdiction, for example, in Victoria, BC, in Vancouver, in 2023, it was the highest number of units that were permitting in the third quarter of 2023. So municipalities are on the line with the resources they have right now, but the fiscal model in which the municipality exists in Canada is broken, and this is why FCM is calling the federal government to convene with the provinces, the territories, and the municipalities to look at it and redefine what is the right approach to make sure that population growth, economic growth could be a success.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can make a comment, but like we've got about 15 seconds. I'm just trying to hold everybody to the time. But go ahead. Yeah, quickly.
Sure. What role do you see the federal government playing in funding public transit to make these more, to ensure that we can support the type of housing density that we need to build?
Very quick answer, please.
The Permanent Public Transit Fund that was announced recently that is supposed to kick in 2026. FCM is calling for an acceleration to this, and it's certainly a first part of the solution.
Merci. Thank you very much. Well done. And now to MP Sainte-Marie.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Mr. Bélanger. I imagine that you are aware of the study that was sponsored by the Quebec Municipal Federation. 40% of municipalities have needed to suspend some of their construction projects because of the rising costs. So what can the federal government do to accelerate the launching of municipal projects now and in the future? The question of inflation costs certainly hits municipalities directly when it comes to large infrastructure projects, and this has an impact on the ability to do housing projects because the funding isn't available. We know that the Federal Infrastructure Fund doesn't take inflation costs into account. In Windsor, for example, a large climate change project is unable to get underway because of these additional costs, which were not provided for when the project was initiated and the funding assigned. So certainly that is a major issue. Thank you.
Merci, MP Sainte-Marie. MP Blakey, you'll be the final questioner for this first panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Ms. Robertson, I think the kind of tailored approach, obviously, for folks who already have some negative amortization or other measures to provide relief is important because, as you've said, like not everybody's situation is the same, but it does raise the specter of people within one financial institution getting different treatment, and also, folks between institutions getting different treatment. I wonder if you think that eliminating the stress test for folks who already have an insured mortgage would allow there to be more competition for Canadians' financial services and might incent banks as a market mechanism to provide better types of relief so that we don't see some banks who have a captured market, which is folks who have an insured mortgage and can't leave, decide to exploit that while others don't, and folks are just kind of trapped wherever they happen to get their mortgage in the first place. Do you think that kind of competition would be useful?
So the guideline actually is intended to address exactly the issue that you raise, which is the risk of inconsistency across institutions, or certainly within institutions, I suppose, is also a possibility. So that was one of the main drivers for us for issuing it, to make it clear to the industry what the expectations were. Within the guideline, we also contain some clarity around the expectations that people in the situation of receiving relief should not receive a less advantageous rate than otherwise. So again, dealing with the issue of a prohibited behavior, which is to take advantage of, being more explicit in this particular circumstance.
Would increased competition help enforce that guideline? So the guideline isn't strictly speaking enforceable. Would increased competition make it more likely that financial institutions observe the guideline?
Yeah. So we are very comfortable that institutions are observing the guidelines and will observe the guideline. Of course, the guideline isn't law. It is our communication to industry about how we will apply the law. So in that sense, it is absolutely enforceable.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Blakey. And we want to thank our witnesses. Thanks for accommodating in terms of the time. We started a little late. And thank you for your testimony on this housing study. And at this time, members, we will be transitioning to our second panel. Thank you very much. We're back, and it's great to have the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities, the Honourable Sean Fraser, with us today. And of course, he's no stranger to this committee because you sat on this committee for a number of years on Finance Committee. So welcome back. And we have also MP Fragascatos, PS Fragascatos, who also was sat on this committee for many years. Joining the minister is the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation Interim Chief Financial Officer and Senior Vice President, Policy, Nadine LeBlanc. Welcome. As well as the Chief Economist for CMHC, Bob Dugan. And from the Office of Infrastructure of Canada, we have Deputy Minister Kelly Gillis. So welcome. So on that, Minister, you'll have an opportunity to make some opening remarks, and then we'll get into the members' questions.
And how much time do I have for opening remarks, Mr. Chair?
About
Look, I'll try to keep it tight to just a few minutes then. Merci tout le monde pour être ici.
So thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm pleased to talk about the challenges and opportunities regarding housing in Canada.
Opportunity to be part of today about how we're going to build more homes. We are living through a housing crisis in Canada, and if we're going to get out of it, we need to build more homes, and we need to build them by the millions. When I look at the challenges that people are facing, it's impacting them in a very real and serious way. When I talk to students, they have a challenging time finding places that they can afford, and if they can find a place, it's often a lengthy commute away from their class or in an overcrowded situation. When I talk to young people who are thinking about their opportunities to start their career, they're worried about their opportunity to find a place to live in the city that may create that opportunity, or to potentially buy a place where they can raise their family at some point in time. I talk to seniors who want to age in place in the same community where their grandkids are being raised, which I don't think is too much to ask, but find themselves without an option to downsize into a place that they can actually afford. And I think constantly about the impact on communities that miss out on the opportunity for people to contribute to their dynamism, to their economy, by contributing their talents, should they be able to find a place they can afford. The place that we are today is a result of a confluence of different factors. Some of them have been decades in the making. Some of them have arrived more recently. I think about decisions taken by different governments of different political affiliation over the course of 30 years to not invest in affordable housing. I think about more recently the pattern that we've seen when interest rates were extremely low during the pandemic, where people bought up properties and are suddenly facing a higher interest rate environment that's not just putting pressure on the people who bought those homes, but has crowded others out of the market. Despite the enormity of the challenges that we're facing, I do believe that we can solve this challenge. We as a society, the federal government can't do it on its own, but we need to play a leadership role. The way that I think we can do that is putting measures in place that are going to help build more homes, that are going to support Canadians in need and make it easier to rent or buy a home. When it comes to building more homes, we need to make the math work for builders. We have seen an increase in the cost of material, labor, supplies, land, and of course interest in recent years that have caused a lot of projects that were marginal before to not be possible to move forward with because the economic case has fallen apart. We have obviously removed the GST from new apartments. We've put low-cost financing on the table through the Apartment Construction Loan Program. We've recapitalized the Canada Mortgage Bond Program to put more cheap money on the market. But it's not enough for us just to address the cost of building. We also have to address some of the systemic challenges around how communities actually allow homes to get built. We need to squeeze more productivity when it comes to housing policy out of the infrastructure investments that we are making. We obviously have been rolling out deals with, I believe, 36 now communities across the country through the Housing Accelerator Fund to put federal money on the table, not necessarily to directly construct the homes, but to change the rules on how homes are built that will have a positive impact in perpetuity around zoning practices and permitting processes in particular. We also need to adopt an industrial strategy around home building with a focus on training opportunities for Canadian workers, immigration streams that bring talent to Canada where it doesn't exist today. And we need to incentivize innovation in home building, particularly to get more homes built in factories across the country. When we put together this plan that will help build more homes, we can't ignore the fact that there are vulnerable people who need particular kinds of homes to be built. This is where investments in affordable housing come into play. The Affordable Housing Fund, which was recently recapitalized with an additional $1 billion in the fall economic statement, is designed to help with the capital cost of putting up those kinds of homes for people who have intense need. In addition, we've rolled out programs to support communities that are dealing with homelessness challenges. And despite the fact that we have made serious investments, I'll be the first to acknowledge we have a long way to go given the extraordinary nature of the challenges that communities are dealing with today. In addition, we've got other programs that have supported people directly, for example, the Canada Housing Benefit. But we can't ignore the fact that there are people who come from different demographic communities that are disproportionately impacted. I think in particular of Indigenous peoples across Canada that will benefit from upcoming federal investments in housing that have for too long been ignored and not benefited from the same level of investment that other Canadians benefit from when it comes to housing policy. Finally, we need to make sure that young Canadians in particular have a place that they can rent or buy. We've created the First Home Savings Account, which I'm pleased to share has now seen more than 500,000 young Canadians sign up for a tax-free savings account towards the down payment of their first home. There's a suite of other measures that we are looking at or have implemented to help reduce pressure on rental markets, but given the fact that I'm pretty sure I am exhausting my 5 minutes, Mr. Chair, I'll cut my opening remarks off there and gladly take what questions committee members may have.
Thanks, Minister. Right on time. And so we are going to jump into our questions in our first round. Each party has 6 minutes to ask questions. We are starting with MP Hallen, please.
Thank you, Chair. 2 years ago, Minister, you were the Minister of Immigration, and at that time, your department gave your government a very dire warning that at that time said that housing starts had not kept up with the pace of rapid population growth. In other words, it would make housing more expensive because it would fuel demand. There was a housing crisis then. It's even worse now. Who made the decision to ignore that warning? Was it you, or were you told to ignore that decision, that warning?
No one ignored any warnings. The part of the story that you may not be familiar with is the warnings around what would happen to our healthcare system. When I talk to folks in the sector, the warning from home builders that we would not be able to build homes if they didn't have access to talent. The warning from the business community about the massive closures that would take place if we didn't work
Minister, it was absolutely ignored by somebody, because after that warning, in the last 8 years, rents have doubled in this country under your government. Canadians, students, and even newcomers now, as you addressed inside your opening statements, now they're living in cars, they're living under bridges, because the cost of shelter has skyrocketed in this country. You had a report in front of you when you were Immigration Minister where you and your government were warned that if you continued down the path that you were going, that it would fuel a worse housing crisis, which we see today. That is a consequence of you ignoring that. So once again, who ignored that warning? Was it you, or were you told to ignore that and continue down that path?
One of the things that's really important for Canada's social and economic well-being is that we don't seek to attribute the very real challenges we're having with housing exclusively to the issue of immigration. And I think it's important that we understand that the rate of interest have changed, that the cost of material supplies, labor.
Both.
Mr. Chair, when I'm asked a question, do I have the liberty to have the same amount of time to offer a response?
Time to give a response. So what I am asking for members is please no crosstalk while we're here, and to be able to allow the minister to answer a question. Please, MP Hallen.
Respectfully, I think the minister continues to deflect away from this, from ignoring this dire warning that his own department gave him. Minister, you and your government had a report in front of you given to you by your own department. You guys literally threw it out and ignored the warning that caused the housing crisis that we're in today and made it even worse. So tell us, what did you do? What was the immediate action you took when that department told you that your current plans were going to lead to a worse housing crisis?
Mr. Chair, this is the first time I've heard the Conservative Party openly suggest that the cause of the housing crisis is immigration.
Excuse me, that's false. That's
Point of order,
absolutely
Chair.
false.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Point of order.
That's,
You can
That's a-
read the
order.
record back, Mr. Chair.
Point of order. Mr. Hallan continues to interrupt. He's done this with prior ministers. He's doing it with this minister. I would just ask you, Chair, and I'd ask Mr. Hallan to please allow the minister to answer the question.
An absolute
MP
false.
Alon, MP Alon, MP
It's-
Alon,
It's my
MP
time,
Alon.
Chair.
Please, stop with the crosstalk. Okay, MP Alon.
Chair, it was-
Allow for answers to be given.
It was a false accusation made against
Point
me.
of order. Point of order, Mr. Chair. Point of order. That is the
order.
third question I have not heard the minister respond to. The time should be given to him right now to actually respond to all of those three questions instead of the melodramatic sort of questioning that
false
the other
accusation is
side
made.
without allowing any time
Chair, I
to
will
respond.
continue with my time.
MP Alon, the minister should be allowed to answer the question. You've
He made-
asked a number of
he made
questions.
a
You have not
false-
allowed the minister to answer the question.
Chair, I'll
MP
continue with my
Alon, the
questions.
minister will have an opportunity to answer your question.
I will continue
minister,
with my time.
The
and I will
minister
not-
has the
I
floor.
will not let the minister continue to make
Mr.
false
Chair, do I have the
accusations.
floor?
You have
It
the
is-
floor,
it is-
Minister.
Thank you, Mr.
Minister
Chair.
has
my
the floor.
time. No, that's not how this works,
The
Chair.
minister has the
It's
MP
shameful.
Alon.
Chair,
It's
do I have
shameful
the
that-
floor or do I not?
It
You
is.
do have the floor, Minister. You
you,
can
Chair. I
answer the
appreciate
question.
that.
I will
very
take my
much.
time
I'm
back.
happy to answer
Minister,
the
it
honourable
is
member's
shameful
question.
that you would tell an immigrant to this country like myself.
MP Alon.
Point of
somehow-
order. Point
Hold on,
of
it's my-
order.
MP Alon.
Chair,
Point
now
of
you're
order.
interrupting
MP
me.
Alon.
That's not how this works, Chair.
It's MP Alon. It's the crosstalk, MP Alon.
I know
Please.
it's my
Yeah,
time now,
no.
Minister. Chair, I will continue with my
Point
time.
of order.
Mr. Chair,
It is.
Mr. Chair,
It is shameful.
I'm curious if I have the floor or I do not. I believe you are in charge of the procedure at the
yes,
meeting.
yes.
I would be happy to provide an answer to the question.
Minister, we want you to answer the questions that MP Alon had asked.
I
MP
will
Alon
move
had
on
asked
with
some
my- I will
questions
move
and
on.
allow for an answering of the question, MP Alon.
I will move on with my question because the minister made
Point of order.
a
I'm
very
sorry.
false
No,
accusation.
I'm sorry.
Point of
I'm
order.
This is
sorry.
not a
No.
point of order.
Point of order.
I am sorry. Mr. Hallam is not allowing the minister to answer
This is not a point of order. It's not-
Okay.
Correct.
This
Member-
absolutely is a
Chair,
point
that's
of
not a
order.
valid
Yes,
point of
yeah.
order.
Members.
Correct it.
Absolutely.
Members, what we want is respect and decorum. We have the minister here for an hour. The time is ticking away. What we want is for members to ask their questions and the minister, and if need be, the officials to be able to answer those questions. Allow for those answers to be given without the crosstalk.
And it is my time now, so I will continue. It's shameful that the minister would tell an immigrant like myself that we would blame immigration. It's actually the Bank of
Point
Canada.
of order. I'm sorry.
It's
I'm
the
going to
Bank
keep
of
on
Canada.
interrupting
Point of
as
order.
long as the minister doesn't have a chance to respond. I'm very sorry, Mr.
This
Chair.
is not a valid point of order. This is cross
Absolutely. This is a point of order. I'm not allowing a
Name the rule.
monologue.
Name the rule. There's no rule. This is you better criticize her just like you did him.
Zarowitz, what has been noted here is that, okay, the member can ask his question. The minister will have ample opportunity to answer that question, MP Alon, without crosstalk.
I wasn't done my question yet. I was in the middle of it.
Yeah.
The
So
bank.
I'm-
it was
Point of order.
actually-
He's
it
asked
was-
three questions.
point
There's
of
been
order.
no responses.
That's not a question. I haven't asked my question. Let me continue, Chair. The Bank
Point
of
of order.
Canada is actually.
Point of order.
I'm very sorry. There's been no response. I'm waiting for a response from
This
the minister,
is not
Mr.
a
Chair.
valid point of order. This is crosstalk. Can you please respect the interpreters?
P. Lawrence, you don't have the floor. I'm addressing a point of order here. There's a point of order
It's
going
not
on.
a valid one.
My point of order, Mr. Chair.
Members, like I said, time is valuable and time is ticking away. So we want a question, and then we want to allow
I haven't
time
gotten to my
for
question yet. I will give the minister time
for an answer.
I haven't gotten to my question. So once again, it's shameful that the minister would blame an immigrant and say and falsely accuse an immigrant like myself that I would blame immigration. It's actually the Bank of Canada who has said this when they said their current policy report that said population growth is directly fueling rent inflation. It's driving up rent and housing prices because as a direct result of you and your government ignoring the report by your own department, Canadians are spending over 60% of their income on shelter costs now, and RBC even says that Canada is a nation of renters because people can't afford homes. So tell us, what was the immediate reaction when you got that report? Or did you just throw it away? Or are you covering up for somebody?
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have to answer this question?
You have time to answer the question, Minister.
Thank you. First of all, for the sake of clarity, Mr. Hallen was my critic while I was the immigration minister, and I know him to be someone who supports immigration. When I was referring during my preamble to the blaming immigration as a cause of the housing crisis, it was a reflection of the words that he used in the question, not his personal view of whether immigration is good. Mr. Chair, do I have the floor? This is very. I'm happy to sit here and have people talk back and forth. I'd rather talk about solutions to the housing crisis. With respect to the issue of immigration, when it comes to our permanent residency programs, I remain confident that we can continue to have high levels of immigration, but we need to build the houses to accommodate a growing population. We have challenges with our temporary programs in immigration that are not set by the government in terms of the number of people who come. They're driven by the demand that employers use for the temporary foreign worker program or that institutions use when it comes to the international student program. We are implementing reforms now and started, frankly, when I was immigration minister.
Okay, Minister, I only have a limited amount of time.
Mr. Chair, the member continues to talk over the answer. May I continue?
You did raise, you did raise, well,
the minister's trying to answer your question.
He did not touch on.
Well, it's because I'm continually interrupted. I'm going to continue with my answer, Mr. Chair. If you think I should stop, I will stop. When it comes to our temporary programs,
if you could just finish up the answer, and then we'll get to MP Hallen's next.
When it comes to our temporary programs, there are challenges.
Point of order. Yeah.
We need to be very considerate of the interpreter's health. Please stop the crosstalk.
Mr. Chair, can I wrap up in 10 seconds? We have challenges with our temporary programs that are driven by folks who have access to these programs increasing the demand they put on the system. To respond to those changes in behavior, we are implementing reforms, including recent reforms that Minister Miller has implemented, that we will be able to ensure restores integrity to the program and also reduces pressure on communities that have seen very serious increase in the total number.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of order. As has often been said, we have to respect our interpreters. For the last 10 minutes, we've had crosstalk, and this makes it impossible for the interpreters to do their work. They do excellent work for us, but they have to be able to hear what's going on. So I would please ask you to stop the crosstalk.
P. Thompson, you're 100% correct. So I apologize, and we all should apologize to the interpreters here. The crosstalk is affecting them. It affects the health and safety of people. So we have to understand to be respectful, decorum, don't scream into your mic, allow people to answer questions, allow those to ask questions. Let's do this in a respectful way is what is being asked here. So MP Hallen, on that, please.
Minister, according to CIBC, they gave a grave warning that Canada needs an additional 5 million new homes units by 2030, on top of the ones that are already projected. That's about 1.5 million more additional homes than the CMHC even projected. Your own housing agency, the CMHC, said they had no faith in your government that these homes will be built, just recently in this committee. CIBC says the housing crisis is largely due to a failure in planning. So how are these homes going to get built?
Thank you for the question. Mr. Chair, I've walked people through the bones of the approach to housing during my opening remarks. We're going to see the homes get built when we reduce the cost of home building by putting incentives in place. We're going to see more homes get built when we change the way that communities build homes by incentivizing them to reduce red tape and to speed up permitting process.
Minister, it's been 8
years. Mr. Chair, I want to be respectful of my colleagues.
MP Hallen, your time is already up, well beyond, actually. So, Minister, finish up your remarks, and then we will move on to the next MP questioner.
Long story short, we can reduce the cost of building by putting incentives on the table. We can change the way cities build homes by putting federal money on the table to change zoning and permitting processes, and we can build an industrial strategy in collaboration with cities, the private sector, nonprofits, and provincial governments. When I actually look at the comparison between the plan that we're putting forward and that Mr. Hallen's party is putting forward, it's clear and very obvious the measures that they are putting forward would actually lead to a fewer number of homes to be built than we are already on track to, and we simply can't let that happen.
Thank you, Minister and MP Hallen. And now we're moving to our next MP. MP Baker, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here at the Finance Committee. Minister, I'm going to ask a few questions that my constituents ask me all the time. And one of the questions I get a lot is around what's caused housing prices to climb so significantly, especially over recent years. As you pointed out in your preamble, folks are struggling. Folks are struggling to buy a home, those who want to buy one. Folks are struggling to rent a home. First-time buyers in particular are struggling. And, of course, the higher interest rates that we're experiencing are obviously a tremendous challenge to folks who are renewing mortgages. So there's a whole series of issues around the cost of housing that people are struggling with. Could you just answer this question for me? Like, what has caused housing prices to go so high?
Look, thanks very much. I wish it were as simple as giving a quick answer, but there's not one factor. We can trace back some of the challenges to decisions, maybe the late 80s, certainly the early 90s, on cuts to government-funded affordable housing programs, because the need for low-income families is different, although happening in parallel to the challenges that we've seen more recently in the market. When you've got 30 years of a failure to invest, and I should say both Liberal and Conservative governments are guilty of this mistake, that we started to correct in 2017 with the National Housing Strategy. We need to continue to use that strategy to invest in affordable housing for low-income families, but we need to increase the ambition of some of those programs to build more affordable homes, to build more cooperative homes, to build more housing supply outside of the market. Within the market, there's a number of factors that are present right now. Some of them are driven by changes to the rate of interest that have made it more difficult for people to afford the home that they already have or to get into the market in the first place. Others are driven by the fact that within the market, when the interest rates were very low, there was, in some communities across Canada, including mine, a buying frenzy that took place disproportionately in my community from people who came from Ontario during the pandemic, who bought up a lot of the properties that were on the market. This has reduced the vacancy rate in communities, which puts pressure on, frankly, both the rental market and the home ownership market. Of course, when you layer on top of that, you see this increased in rate of interest. It exacerbates the nature of the challenge for people who missed the opportunity to get into the market at the time that are not now facing it. Certain communities have seen dramatic increases in population from different sources. Again, my community was mostly people coming from Ontario. There are communities that have seen significant influx of temporary residents, international students, for example, in college and university towns that have had local impacts. So there's not one factor, but when you see the confluence of these various factors happening simultaneously, some that were built up over decades, some that are more recent developments, you see that it's created a perfect storm that has increased the cost of renting or buying a home that's having a very real impact on people that we need to address.
I appreciate that. And you know, you have the representative here from CMHC who's been to Finance Committee before. One of the things that struck me during your testimony, sir, and my questions to the minister, but I did want to raise this, is I remember asking you a very similar question a number of months ago, and during your response, one of the things that struck me was you talked about how the supply of homes has not kept up with demand. In other words, the number of new homes we build has not kept up with the number of new people seeking homes in Canada. Minister, do you agree with that that's been a major factor and that started a number of years ago?
Yeah, that's a part. It's not the only factor, but it is a part of it. And if we're going to get out of the housing crisis, we need to build at a much, much faster pace. Forget for the moment that there will continue to be people from around the world that want to come to Canada. Even to meet the need that we have now, we'll need to build at a much faster pace. So absolutely, we need to be looking at the population growth we're experiencing and building more homes to accommodate the growth that is powering our communities, powering our economy forward. This was actually one of the issues that we addressed during the Strategic Immigration Review that produced a report a few months ago that was looking at the issue of needing to tie population growth to housing output. But we need to do everything we can to increase the pace of building if we're going to meet the demand that exists today, let alone the demand that will exist 10 years from now as Canada's population presumably continues to experience growth.
Another question that my constituents ask me, Minister, is when are housing prices going to stabilize and when are they going to come down? So that's the question. You know, when I speak with my constituents, they ask me this all the time. And frankly, what I say to them is I'll talk with Minister Fraser about it and ask him what he thinks. So could you, for the sake of my constituents, could you share with your perspective on when are housing prices going to stabilize and when are they going to come down?
Yeah, look, if I had a crystal ball, I would perhaps be better positioned to answer the question. The answer is not the identical in different communities. The housing markets are, though interconnected, are local in nature, and the impact in the housing market in rural Nova Scotia, where I live, may be different than in the GTA where you live. But when we actually build enough homes to meet the demand and have a better vacancy rate than we have today, we'll get to a point where if you lose your apartment for some reason, you will be able to find another one at the same price you were renting at before. When we actually build out the homes to meet the demand in the buyer's market, you'll be, I expect, to see a clear reflection of the cost of building a home built into the price rather than sellers maximizing what they can get because there's so much competition in the market. All of this is in a context that's impacted by factors outside of the federal government's control as well. For example, the interest rate decisions that the Bank of Canada will make independent. My sense is that we can continue to see progress over the next number of years, and things already, if you look at the rate of inflation that's impacting people, has come down over the past couple of years. And I expect as we go forward, not just on a month-to-month basis, but a year-to-year basis, things will progressively get better as we continue to see more homes being built over time. So I don't have a magic date on the calendar that I can circle when suddenly all things will be fixed, but my sense is we can rapidly make progress and have things get progressively better routinely in the years ahead.
Thank you, MP Baker. And now to MP Sainte-Marie, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to the Minister and the other witnesses. First of all, my question is for Mr. Dugan at CMHC. You came before the committee on September 28th, 2023, and you made a commitment to give us written answers to certain questions, but we are still waiting for those through the clerk of the committee. For example, we asked you for a breakdown of CMHC programs by provinces and the costs, but we're still waiting for that. Another question that we had asked a response for was a housing project under CMHC in Joliette, where permission was sought for a building that would be half occupied by people with disabilities, and we haven't had information on that. Part of the work on that was being done by the Quebec Housing Organization, but there had to be cooperation with the CMHC, but there was a need for investment from the CMHC so that they could be sold at a lower price. So we want to know what is happening with that. We are still waiting for the federal response, but I wrote to the CMHC 5 months ago and to the minister, but still nothing is happening. The Quebec Housing Agency still can't move forward with this, and it has also sought information. There's also the question of your study on the housing short of 3.5 million units. We finally got information that indicated that we would get an answer on progress on that in the first quarter of this year. But I would like you to answer on this before I get to the minister. According to Bloomberg, the RBC has said that 5 million units was the number that we were short rather than 3.5 million because there's a lot of temporary demand by temporary workers. Mr. Dugan was the only witness who promised written answers but has not provided them. Mr. Chair, through you, we certainly take very seriously any questions that are asked by the committee, and we certainly commit to providing the responses very quickly to the members here of the committee. I didn't take note of all of the questions in detail, but you talked about that project in Joliet, and we are working with the Quebec agency. There are parameters and expectations. We have to look at the authorities that we have. We've got that analysis underway right now. Thank you for that answer. For over 5 months now, we've been calling on the CMHC, and that's where the blockage is. I just have a short time now to ask some questions of Mr. Fraser, the minister. As you know, the Bloomberg report and RBC have indicated that the shortage is really 5 million units, but in 2024, we're not moving forward as quickly as possible. So we will only feel the effect of the new measures next year. There are going to be a lot of people, therefore, without housing this year. Is it true that the government is going to cut 3% from the budgets of homelessness organizations this year in the upcoming budget? Thank you, Mr. Sainte-Marie, for your questions. The strategy, the housing strategy for Canada is very important.
Shortage, whether it's 3.5 billion or 5 million, we still need to implement all of the measures that we're dealing with, and we still need to support communities that are taking place. I'm not going to project on what decisions Minister Freeland may make in the budget. Suffice it to say, we continue to support community organizations that are helping folks who do not have a place to live. Just in advance of the holidays, we topped up the Reaching Home program, for example, with an additional $100 million so they could address acute needs in advance of cold weather setting in. We're going to continue to work with communities both at a municipal level and with service provider organizations to identify how we can best leverage federal supports, but I'm not in a position to project on what budget decisions may be taken in advance of the upcoming federal budget.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. S'il reste du temps, je vais laisser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I have any time left, I will allow my colleague to speak.
Other parties did go well over time, so I was going to allow you for one really quick question, but we'll build that into our next round. So we've got MP Blakey up now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome back to the committee, Mr. Minister. Around your neck of the woods, I think there's over 7,500 people who are waiting for affordable housing, and the wait list is about 2 years. And despite an election commitment to put an end to the practice of renovictions, where landlords improve the property, sometimes just superficially, jack up the rents, and then evict tenants. We know that that's still going on in areas like Dartmouth and Halifax. One of the ways to push back against that would be to empower community organizations with experience in delivering housing to be able to acquire buildings instead of having them sold to the types of landlords that engage in renoviction. I didn't hear anything about a nonprofit acquisition fund in your opening comments. I'd like to know if that's something that your government is seriously considering in this budget cycle.
Look, thanks for the question. And sincerely, this is not the first time we've discussed this, and I believe honestly that you care about this issue for all the right reasons, as do I. A potential acquisition fund is one of the strategies we could use to grow non-market supply to help protect in perpetuity housing for low-income families. We did see with the Housing Accelerator Fund agreement we signed with the City of Toronto, they're using a portion of their funds to go to the MURA program, which more or less is designed to achieve the ends that you've talked about. That was our first recent foray into this space. We're not at a place to roll out what policies may look like, but we're considering the different aspects of an affordable housing strategy that will help grow that non-market supply. We will have to take decisions in the months ahead as to what the specific measures will include, but I'm not in a position today to announce that we will be moving forward with such a fund, but it remains one of the items that we're considering. We just want to make sure we're getting the greatest return on investment for every public dollar we spend to help address the needs of low-income families who have inadequate housing today.
I'm sure you've heard the number that Canada's losing 15 units of affordable housing for every one that we're building at the moment. I mean, how would you characterize the sense of urgency with which government should be acting in order to shore up Canada's existing affordable housing supply?
Look, I think you're using the right language. This is for people who don't have a place to go and security of tenure at the place they go to sleep every night. It is an emergency. There is no opportunity that we have to waste time. We have to work with the sector that can actually implement the programs. We have to come up with the policies that will be able to roll those programs out quickly, and we have to work with other levels of government to make sure that we're leveraging every dollar we spend to maximize the productivity. So to the extent you're asking me whether this is urgent and demands immediate action, yes, of course, but let's not pretend that there have been no measures put in place to date. I think you'll have noticed a significant uptick in the rate of policy change over the past few months, but this isn't something that just started a few months ago. I agree with presumably your perspective that we need to do more and to do it faster, and that's what I spend most of my days trying to accomplish.
I think there's a lot of folks who took it as a bad sign in the fall economic statement that the recapitalization of the co-investment fund and the new version of the rental construction financing initiative, which you referred to, the ACLP, in your opening remarks, that money isn't coming for another 2 years. And so I wonder how you can square backloading that money, given that we need to not only continue what spending has happened under the National Housing Strategy, but we actually need to ramp that up. How you can square backloading money in those budgetary tables with the sense of urgency that you've described at the table here today.
Yeah, this is an important question, and we should point out that in addition to the measures you mentioned in the fall economic statement, that document did also include an additional $300 million in grant money for cooperative housing that will be rolled out this year. The programs that you pointed to, though, they're already operating. Those are programs, both of which have some money in them right now. So though the money that was included in the fall economic statement, we anticipate that will be spent a couple of years from now. That's not to say there will be nothing spent between now and then. We're going to continue to work to figure out how we can leverage the money that we have in these programs to build when we have good projects that are ready to go. Do we need to continue to try to increase the output? Absolutely we do, but I don't want to signal that a 2-year delay in those specific top-ups flowing means that the funds that they were topping up don't have capitalization today that's actually going to projects, because there are agreements we are signing with money that's available today, and we're going to continue to do that.
I mean, certainly from our perspective in the NDP, we would say making that money available sooner increases the possibility of having more projects proceed quicker. If the projects aren't ready to go and you have to sit on the money, then at least there's a good reason. But deciding in advance that money won't flow for 2 years means that even if there are eligible projects, they won't be able to move forward. And we're certainly hearing from community partners that those funds are oversubscribed, that there's already more demand for what's in the pot. And so we would certainly like to see that moved up. I do want to confirm, while I have you at the table, that for the ACLP, the government's definition of affordable, when it's building affordable units under that program, will be 80% of market value, as opposed to some of the other measures that were used early on in the life of the rental construction financing initiative.
Yeah, and I think this is important to understand the purpose behind different programs. So the Affordable Housing Fund, that's designed for housing for low-income families to be kept at a price that low-income families can afford. The Apartment Construction Loan Program, I think, to your point, around the use of the word affordable, that means different things to different people. The Apartment Construction Loan Program, in my view, is meant to address the challenge of a shortage of supply in the market.
There are affordable housing provisions within that program, even though it's not solely for the construction of affordable units. So my question is, for those affordable units within the program, whatever percentage that will be, will the government's definition be 80% of market value?
As it stands today, that is it. But that's, just to be clear, that program is not designed to boost the supply exclusively for low-income families. It's to boost supply generally and to maintain the market at a price at or below where apartments are being rented today. So it's part of the supply solution that over time will bring down prices as we see an evening out of supply and demand, but it needs to be supplemented with a program such as the Affordable Housing Fund. So we're targeting what's often referred to as deeply affordable housing for low-income families with serious need.
What we
Thank
refer
you,
to as social housing.
thank you, MP Blakey. That's the time for the first round. Now, we got off to a bumpy start here at the beginning, and we want to thank the minister that came in and accommodated, because we started also late our meetings today. We have about 20 minutes or so, 22 minutes. We don't have time for a full round. We have divided the time amongst parties equally in the past. I'm looking at members, but we got about 20 minutes. Are members good with it?
No.
Okay, but that's what we've done. That's what we've always done on this committee.
Chair, I think we should revert to the rule about the number of seats in the House and split that among the time. So that would mean 5 minutes for us, 5 minutes for the Liberals, 2.5 minutes for the other two parties, and then 2.5 minutes for Conservatives and then Liberals.
Thank you for that, MP Hallen. We would do that if we had the time, which we would have had if we didn't have some interruptions at the beginning of this session, this panel. But right now, I'm going to suspend for a second. I'm going to confer with the clerk about this. Are going to proceed the same way that we have done in the past since we've started this meeting. So we will be dividing the time equally amongst parties. So each party will have approximately 5 minutes for questions. And we will start with the Conservatives, and that is MP Lawrence, please.
Perfect. Thank you, Minister Fraser, for appearing. And we've known each other since we both attended the Conservative convention in Halifax there. So it's been a while. So I'm hoping we can leverage some of this, because we do have a very serious issue in front of us. As we know, mortgages are doubled, rents are doubled. We have people living in tents from coast to coast to coast, including in your very riding, Minister. So I want to start out with the Housing Accelerator Fund. That it started over 3 years ago. It's $4 billion invested. How many houses have been built?
So the Housing Accelerator Fund only started reaching agreements in September of this year. So though it was campaigned on in 2021 and budgeted in 2022, the actual fund led to agreements beginning in September of this year. It's also important to understand the Housing Accelerator Fund doesn't go toward the cost of building houses. It goes towards incentivizing changes at municipal levels that will speed up permitting processes and end exclusionary zoning and increase density around post-secondary institutions, infrastructure, transit, et cetera. So it's one that will lead to more homes, but the nuance in your question is important. It doesn't actually lead to the construction of specific homes.
I understand. Thank you, Minister. But at the end of the day, what we need and what Canadians need is an urgency. In fact, Mr. Dugan came to this committee in 2018 and said that he warned your government that there was a housing supply issue. So we're in a crisis now. So how many houses has the Housing Accelerator built? $4 billion, and 3 years later.
So again, the Housing Accelerator Fund, and I don't mean to be difficult here. The Housing Accelerator Fund does a different thing than your question suggests it does. It is expected with the deals that we've signed so far that it will lead to the construction of or to the addition of more than 500,000 homes over the next decade. But that's not as a result of actually the money going towards construction.
I understand. I don't want to be disrespectful or crosstalk. But today, as of date, you can't point to one key indoor, one new bedroom, one new house is built as as a direct result of the Housing Accelerator Fund.
So I see what you're trying to get towards here. I think it's important to understand when we're signing agreements to change rules in September that it takes more than a few months to actually build out the homes, many of which will be multiplexes or apartment buildings as well. So this is actually, in my view, the fund that has most outperformed very high expectations of anything that I've seen.
Minister, in terms of performance, we have 0 keys and doors. And your government was warned, and Mr. Dugan told us in testimony in September in 2018, we have 0 houses and doors because of the Accelerator Fund. Isn't that true?
Look, I completely disagree with your characterization. And for what it's worth, there are hundreds of thousands of homes that are built or renovated as a result of programs that have been in place since then. But with respect to the Housing Accelerator Fund, this is proving its merit. There are deals with 36 cities who have already changed the ways that they allow homes to get built. We've witnessed in the past 6 months the largest upzoning in Canadian history in cities right across the country. And next week, we're going to start working with small towns and rural communities. So this has been a very big success.
Thank you, Minister, but that's cold comfort at best to Canadians who are continuing to live in tents.
And we want to help them too.
2 million going to food banks, and a whole generation that's given up on housing because of your government. Will any bonuses be paid? Will any bonuses be paid out? Have you signed off on any bonuses for 2023 for any government officials in charge of housing? I think, given the status that an entire generation has given up on home ownership, that rent evictions are up, that rental costs are doubled, and mortgages are doubled, I would say strongly that most Canadians don't believe they deserve a bonus.
So I don't personally assign bonuses to public servants, and frankly, my time is far better spent on advancing measures that are going to get more homes built and to help people in need. The compensation of public service is done independently of my ministerial office.
So officials will receive bonuses for the housing hell that your government has started. That's fine.
That's not the answer that I gave.
My apologies for the crosstalk, Mr. Chair. The gap, CMHC has said that the housing gap between now and 2030, the number that's been used has been 3.5 million. The CIBC came out 2 days ago and said the gap is actually 5 million homes. Would you care to comment on that, Minister?
Yeah, we need to build a lot of homes. I think my opening statement, though I didn't have it written down, was that we need to build homes and build them by the millions. The scale of the challenge is not lost on me. Despite the enormity of that challenge, I believe we can solve the housing crisis.
Minister, sorry.
So MP Lawrence and Minister, if you conclude, and then we'll go to now MP Zerowitz, please, for 5 minutes.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair, and I want to say thank you to you, Minister Fraser, and to the housing officials for being here today. Housing affordability, affordable housing, co-op housing, deeply affordable housing, rental housing. These are all top of mind for my residents, for the residents of my riding of Davenport. Last Friday, I was actually with Deputy Prime Minister Freeland as well as the Mayor of Toronto, and they were making a huge announcement around asylum seekers. And the Deputy Prime Minister, she mentioned that since 2015, the federal government provided a historic amount of funding for the City of Toronto, $5.79 billion, she mentioned. She also indicated that we have, at the federal level, committed $6 billion for housing to support the people of Toronto. And I was really pleased that the mayor agreed by saying that the federal government had delivered for the City of Toronto. So my question to you, Minister Fraser, is can you talk in a little bit more detail about what funding we've actually provided to the City of Toronto around housing, because I know Davenport residents want to know.
Certainly, and I don't have an exhaustive summary in front of me today, but perhaps offline we can share some of the details. But just to draw into focus the scale of what we're doing in Toronto, Keep in mind, in addition to housing, there's enormous infrastructure investments that have been made to support the water and wastewater capacity that allows us to build more homes, the transit systems that are actually going to allow people to access the opportunities that exist within the city, in addition to the direct support for housing. So the marquee fact that I would point you to with respect to the investments we're making in Toronto is the investment through the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is going to result in the acquisition of nonprofit homes, which is going to result in a fundamental change in the zoning practices with a huge focus on transit-oriented development, which is going to focus on digitizing and speeding up the permitting process to get more homes built. This single investment is worth over $470 million just in the city of Toronto. Within the GTA, of course, there are significant other communities who benefit. I think about just across Southern Ontario, look, Kitchener, Guelph, Waterloo, Richmond Hill, there's a number of other communities who've benefited. But in addition to the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is permanently changing the way Toronto will have homes built, we've had a series of direct investments in affordable housing projects through the Affordable Housing Fund. We've had an extraordinary number of investments made for purpose-built rentals through the Apartment Construction Loan Program, which provides low-cost financing. So depending on how you count the dollars and whether you ascribe financing the same way as you do grant contributions, we're in the many hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, and certainly billions if you include the housing enabling infrastructure.
I know Davenport residents will be very happy to hear that. The second question I have for you is young people, whether they're in their mid-20s or late 20s or early 30s, they approach me and they say, MP Zarowitz, will I ever be able to afford to continue to live in the city of Toronto, where I grew up? Will I ever be able to afford a condo or a home? And how would you respond to them, Minister?
Hardly anything is more important. I remember, and look, forgive me for just exploring some of my own reasons for getting involved in politics. My community dealt with a very different challenge 8 years ago than we deal with today. Growing up, I've got 5 sisters. All of us, if you had asked us 10, 12 years ago, what do you want to do? None of us would have known. We all wanted to live in the community where we came from. That wasn't an option for us at the time because not the housing market, because of the job market. Things have changed now in small communities like mine, and big cities have been wrestling with this for a long time. People are being priced out of the communities that they love, where their families live, where they have professional opportunities to grow, to thrive, and to contribute to a city. We have to succeed. Because the cost of failing to build enough homes so people can live in the community where they want to live is not just consequential for the person who can't find a home to live in, though it's worth doing for that in and of itself. The economic impact for the country as a whole, when young people can't move to the cities where the opportunities are or remain in the cities where they grew up, where they have opportunities, that has an impact on all of us. So to the people that you're dealing with, you can let them know that despite the significant challenge which we face, I am filled with a sense of hope that over the next number of years, things are going to get better because I'm seeing the work that's being done to make them get better. I spent all of my time dealing with the people who are doing the good things to build the homes we need so young people can afford a place to live, whether that's a place to rent today or their opportunity to actually to save up to buy a place a few years from now. So we have to do everything we can to reduce the cost of building to get more supply in the market, but we also look at measures to allow people to save up so they don't have to give up on the idea that they may own a place to live one day for themselves. So despite the challenge, I remain hopeful and optimistic, but we have a lot of work to do to get to a place that I want to get to.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, MP Zarowitz. MP Trudel, please. And welcome to our committee.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Minister, I would have liked to give you a break, but my question is for you. I think this has already been mentioned. We heard about the $3.5 million, 3 million units that we are short. 5 million is probably the real number, but in Quebec it's a huge problem. We have been constructing a lot. We really need 200,000. But we're not getting to that number. But even if we get to the target, even if we can, we are we would be building 3 times as many as we've ever built. So I just want to give you an idea of the scope of the problem. Over the past year, I've talked to a lot of organizations throughout Quebec as I've traveled around. There are a lot of condos that are being built. If you earn $200,000 a year, you don't have a problem. So we've got condo buildings going up, but if we have single-parent families and seniors that can't afford housing, what we need is affordable subsidized housing and so on. There seem to be some blockages. There are housing programs in Quebec. Often the federal programs and the provincial ones don't match up. People put in applications. There might be 1 or 2 people in a small office of a community organization. The people have to turn to their municipality, to the Quebec City government. So nobody has enough money. You have launched this housing strategy, but in fact, people haven't got any of that money in Quebec. It's going everywhere else. So, and the negotiations took 1.5 years, I believe, with Quebec, and before we ever got any money. So the timelines are problematic, and the delays are happening in Ottawa, not in Quebec. So could we go in the direction having a single wicket kind of system, a one-stop application area? We know that 200,000 units are needed in Quebec, and if we could accelerate the construction, then we could build more quickly. So if the federal government could just show humility and just provide the funding to Quebec, we could do that. Thank you, Mr. Trudel, for your remarks. It's important to recognize that we have to work with Quebec to accelerate the building of new housing. This isn't a new idea in the sense that we are working together to set priorities and negotiate an agreement. With Quebec, we have provided $900 million. We've come to an agreement on that, so that's a lot of money. We know that the affordable housing comes under one single program, so we have an opportunity to increase our support.
Program that we use, but in fact, we're making changes to our housing programs, both for supply in the market and for affordable housing, where we can work with other jurisdictions or potentially with organizations that have the capacity to build a large number of homes to actually deal with a portfolio approach, where we can say with a provincial government, for example, let's use some of our funds to flow them through a program where you attach yours to the same opportunity for people who will build the houses. So we're making program changes to that effect now. I don't know that it will be appropriate with every single program, depending on what complementary programs provincial governments have in place. But with both the Housing Accelerator Fund in Quebec and our other programs designed to boost supply, we're moving towards a portfolio approach to unlock those the complementarity that exists when we have that strategy.
Merci, Minister. That's the time, MP Trudel. Thank you. And we're going to MP Blakey now. Usually I would say the last questioner, but I understand there's been some discussions to allow MP Maurice to have 2 minutes right after MP Blakey and at the end. Are we okay? You see on that? Okay, great. So MP Blakey, please.
Right on. Well, just to come back to the question of a nonprofit acquisition fund, like we know that, and in part because the previous Conservative government and now this government as well has not been renewing operating grants that were tied to mortgages for affordable housing as they come up for expiration, that there's been corporate landlords and real estate investment trusts that have purchased those buildings, squeezed tenants, in some cases evicting them, and now they want to let those buildings go all over again. And so I think there is concern in the conversation that a nonprofit acquisition fund not be set up in a way that it just becomes a kind of divestment tool for some of these larger landlords that have acquired buildings with affordable units and then, and then upscaled rent. So I'm wondering what kinds of guardrails you think should be in place for a nonprofit acquisition fund to ensure that it doesn't become a divestment tool for large financial interests that own those properties, but is properly focused on ensuring that that money spent is in the public interest and that taxpayers are getting maximum value.
Certainly. So I think whenever you're dealing with new program design, and this is not specific to an acquisition fund, but generally, you want to understand for what purpose is the program in place, and are you going to achieve that purpose? Right now, the purpose, in my view, of considering an acquisition fund or other measures designed to create more non-market housing is to increase the overall stock of housing in Canada that exists outside of the market. I think you know this, but for the benefit of the committee, we're at a bit less than 4% of the total in Canada. The OECD average is closer to 8%. If we put measures in place, my goal is going to be to increase the proportion of homes that exist outside of the market. This is going to ensure, and by the way, there's about 10% of Canadians, a little bit higher, fall below the low-income metric, and I think we should be aiming to make sure they have a place that they can afford. So my focus in terms of the program that I would look at if we're trying to support the acquisition by nonprofits would be making sure that the building is actually going to be held by someone who exists for the purpose of keeping it out of a market setting. I don't want to create a scenario where we put public resources on the table to eventually enrich a private investor who could be investing in the market themselves. So long story short, we just want to make sure the ultimate recipient of the funds we put in place are going to be held outside of a market context. So 10 years from now, we're not in the same place.
In a similar vein, there's been a lot of talk about using federal land to be able to build new housing of various kinds. I think we saw recently in Ontario how wrong the release of protected land can go when there aren't safeguards in place to make sure that what's going to be done with that land is actually in the public interest. So when we talk about use of federal lands, Mr. Poilievre has talked about it. He has not proposed in his bill any safeguards of that type to ensure that public land is actually being used, as New Democrats have proposed, for affordable housing and for social housing. What are some of the guardrails you think need to be put in place around the release of federal lands in order to ensure that those lands are properly used for the public interest and increase our affordable and social housing stock instead of just being a boondoggle for investors?
So, look, first of all, you have to identify parcels of land that are appropriate for housing. If you're dealing with areas that are protected for agricultural or environmental reasons, in my view, that is a complete answer to the question, and you should not use those lands for housing developments. When it comes to the other elements that you want to look at, the guardrails that you want to put in place to ensure you're getting a good return on affordability, because the purpose of putting federal lands on the table is to reduce input costs, not just to build more homes, but to offer them at a better price. I believe that we should insist that there should be a significant portion of the homes are affordable, but on the flip side of the coin, I want to be careful to try to build affordability sort of from an inclusionary zoning. We talk about ending exclusionary zoning an awful lot. I believe that more neighborhoods should include a mix of affordable housing and market-based housing. So I'm not a purist in the sense that every single housing unit has to be owned by a nonprofit just because it was once public land. A significant portion of it should be, but I also want the people living in housing designed for low-income families to feel part of a neighborhood where they don't feel segregated from people who live in market housing in the same building or in the neighboring building. So it's a bit of an art, but I think you do have to put guardrails in place to insist that a minimum level of affordability is going to be achieved. And when I say affordability on public lands, I'm talking about affordability for low-income families, not just at and below market.
Thank you, and thank you, MP Blakey. And now the final 2 minutes, MP Maurice.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues. Minister, I want to start with some items that we agree on. That we are in a housing crisis. I appreciate you've been really clear about that this is a crisis that is 30 years in the making, and that we need to legalize more gentle density, including fourplexes, for example. And in fact, you've been making some excellent progress on that with the Housing Accelerator Fund, and kudos on that. My concern is the number of builders that I'm hearing about who are looking to build fourplexes, and they look at what the federal government has available in terms of loans and contributions to make that happen. And there's an irony there in that there's, the ACLP, as you've spoken about this morning, many, you could go through the list that are all 5 units and higher. And so in advance of Budget 2024, I wonder if you can comment on efforts you're in the midst of to open up funding opportunities for those who want to build the very fourplexes that you're having success getting municipalities to begin to legalize.
Look, thanks for this question, and it's timely, and I'll risk getting ahead of government policy just in the spirit of candor. This is an issue that I'm looking at to figure out whether we can adjust the rules now, but we have to do our homework to make sure we understand the consequences of the policy, both positive and potentially worrisome. But right now, my instinct is that we err on the side of the positives, not only because it will create financing for people who want to build 4 units, it could also potentially open up opportunities to convert existing single-family homes into multi-residential buildings, and that's the style of most apartments in my community. They look like houses, but have been divided to provide homes for different families. But the other piece, if we are to make a change like this, it will coordinate both the 4 units as of right zoning we've embedded into our Housing Accelerator Fund agreements with CMHC financing opportunities should we pursue this change, also with the catalog of pre-approved designs that we're working on. So you'll have aligned financing with manufacturing with pre-approval at a municipal level. If we do all of those things, we can shave many months off the process to getting something built, reduce the barriers for new entrants into the home building sector, and put the roofs over heads of a lot more families at better prices than currently exist on the market. So looking at it, the work isn't done.
Thank you, MP Maurice, and we thank Minister Fraser and officials for coming before us today on this housing study. Thank you for your testimony. And members, shall we adjourn at this time? Okay. We're adjourned.
Thank you.